Well, good morning. Welcome to Monday morning's thought for today. This is the last week in July, and we're looking really at the passage that we thought about yesterday morning in church. That very short passage, really, from Mark chapter 8, reading from verse 27 down to verse 30. A few verses, and yet, as I said yesterday, probably one of the most important conversations that has ever happened in the history of the universe. And I stand by that. I think this conversation is a conversation which doesn't just happen within Matthew, Mark and Luke's gospel, but it also happens, I feel, on a daily basis, because every day Jesus is asking of somebody, who do you say that I am? And so this is the most important conversation, because it's through this conversation that we get to, if you like, distill our own thoughts and feelings about who Jesus is, but also to maybe speak truth into our own life. And that is so vitally important, that we acknowledge who Jesus is and what we believe about him. And so we're looking at this very short passage. So I want to read those words for you that we thought about yesterday. And we'll use these to refresh our minds every morning as we take this time through to the end of the week. This is verse 27 of Mark's Gospel. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he strictly charged them not to tell anyone about him. Those are incredible words, and you know, in a sense, while I preached on it yesterday morning, I could have said far more. And so I want to take the opportunity to do just that in these mornings we have together, doing our thought for today. And this morning I really want to think about that question that Jesus asked, who do people say that I am? Now, if someone was to say to you, what are people saying about me? What would you think? You'd think maybe a few thoughts. Initially, you'd say to yourself, what's wrong with this person? Are they some sort of paranoid person that they think everyone's talking about them? Nobody's saying anything about you. Don't worry, I haven't heard a word about you. Or maybe you'll say to them, well, you know, people talk, you know what people are like. People will say this and people will say that. Half the time they don't mean it, they're not thinking, etc., etc. But if somebody says to you, what are people saying about me? Who do people say that I actually am? That's a question which I suppose can either do one of two things. It can either reveal, I suppose, an uncertainty. Maybe you're feeling as if you're on shaky ground slightly, and you're worried about how you're being perceived by people. Are people liking you? Are people actually listening to what you're saying? Do people give you credit for the way you're thinking, etc., etc.? Or there's a sense that you really want to know if people have, as we would say, got you, if people actually caught on to what it is that you're trying to do. Are people with you in what you're trying to say? Are they understanding you properly? So there's this double sense. One is that you're worried that you've become a topic of conversation, and all the gossips are talking about you. And the second is that you're hoping that somehow people are beginning to fully understand who you are. Now, I don't think Jesus had any concerns about what people were saying about him. I don't think he was paranoid in any way. People were bound to be talking about him. But Jesus Christ was probably the most exciting thing that had happened for 400 years in the Jewish faith. And all of a sudden, he's come along and he's stirred things up, and people are going, wow, this is something new. This is something different. We want to know more. And people, you know, they didn't have the news and television or the radio, and they would have talked to each other. They would have spread the news. People would have had opinions about Jesus. That's obvious. But Jesus wanted to really know, had people worked out who he was? We know that the whole way through the first half of Mark's Gospel, Jesus is telling people to keep it quiet. You've worked out who I am. You've seen what I've done. You've seen the miracles I performed. You've heard my teaching. But don't go blabbing about it to everyone, because my ministry needs to keep going. I've things I need to do. And if I get swamped by people, or if I get people who want to take me away and make me their king, etc., I will not be able to fulfill my purpose here. So while I want you to know, I don't want you necessarily to tell too many people. So there's this messianic secret that we've thought about numerous times. And it even pops up again, if you notice at the end of this passage this morning, verse 30, and he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. So Jesus was concerned that They would understand that he was the Messiah because he came to die for them. He came to die for us. And therefore, he wanted them to have a proper understanding about what was going on. But secondly, he didn't want this idea of his ministry getting scuppered in any way. And so we have to understand what was going on there also. So Jesus was worried what people thought, or was he just concerned that they got the right end of the stick? I do believe Jesus wanted people to know, but also wanted to come along and understand who he was, because something big was going to happen, and they needed to understand that this was part of God's plan, and that all this talk about Jesus being Messiah hadn't come crumbling down around them at the crucifixion. So Jesus was concerned, and he didn't have anybody to tell him that the polls are saying this, or the exit poll is saying that from the local synagogue, etc. So Jesus wanted to test the water with his disciples. He knew that they would have been hearing what other people have been saying. But what are people saying about Jesus today? We know that people still think largely that Jesus Christ was just a good man, and that it was unfortunate that he had to be killed. But people come, people go. He wasn't any better than anyone else, and he certainly wasn't any worse than anyone else. He was just a regular person. He said some interesting things. He said some things which, I suppose I could build my life on to a certain extent. But there are other things which, I love my enemies. No, I'm going to keep hating my enemies. Jesus made certain differences with some people. People are still saying certain things about him. But the most important thing, and we've been thinking about this yesterday, and we'll continue thinking about it this week, is it doesn't really matter what other people think about Jesus. What matters is, what do you believe about Jesus? Thank you for being with me today. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow, Tuesday morning. Till then, God bless.